The detour sign started about 30 miles outside of town. Orange cones funneled traffic off the highway and onto a narrow two-lane road that sneaked through dry fields and patches of scrubby trees. Rachel tightened her grip on the steering wheel and squinted at the GPS mounted to the dashboard. The screen flickered, recalculating for the third time. Rerouting, the calm digital voice said again. I know, Rachel muttered, her throat tight. She hadn't slept more than a few hours the night before. The funeral had been that morning. Her older sister, Melissa, laid out in a pale blue dress she'd hated while alive. Rachel could still smell the lilies, still see their mother sobbing into a damp handkerchief. She just wanted to get home. The GPS traced a thin blue line off the highway and onto a smaller road labeled County Route 19. Estimated time saved, 15 minutes. 15 minutes sounded like mercy. She turned onto the road without thinking much about it. The pavement was cracked but drivable, the kind of rural road that locals used and outsiders avoided. The farther she went, the fewer houses she saw. Soon, there were no mailboxes, no driveways, just fields stretching out flat and empty on both sides. The sky was beginning to bruise purple with the coming dusk. Rachel checked the fuel gauge, a quarter tank. She exhaled slowly. That was fine. The GPS said it would connect back to the highway in 20 miles. Plenty of gas for that. She turned up the radio to fill the silence, but all she got was static and the occasional ghost of a country station fading in and out. With a sigh, she switched it off. The quiet pressed in, thick and uncomfortable, broken only by the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thump of tires on uneven asphalt. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The road never curved. It stretched forward in a straight, unwavering line, disappearing into the dimming horizon like a ribbon pulled too tight. Rachel glanced at the GPS again. The blue line still showed her on County Route 19, still promising a connection to the highway just a few miles ahead. But the distance number didn't seem to be changing. It hovered stubbornly at 3.2 miles, as if frozen. That's weird, she whispered. She drove another minute. The number flickered to 3.1, then jumped back to 3.2. Her stomach twisted. The fuel gauge dipped below a quarter tank. Okay, she said aloud as if explaining things to herself would make them make sense. It's just a glitch. GPS does that. She kept driving. The sun sank fully below the horizon, leaving only a smear of red that quickly faded into deep blue. The road was now lit only by her headlights, two narrow cones of yellow that cut through the dark. Beyond them, the world was nothing but shadow. That was when she saw the first figure. At first, she thought it was a fence post, something thin and vertical off to the right side of the road. But as she drew closer, her headlights washed over it, revealing a shape that was unmistakably human. A person stood in the field about 10 feet from the shoulder. They were facing the road, standing perfectly still. Rachel's foot eased off the accelerator. The figure didn't wave, didn't step forward. It just stood there, arms hanging straight at its sides, head slightly tilted as if watching her pass. A chill crept up Rachel's spine. Probably a farmer, she told herself, or someone waiting for a ride. But there were no houses, no cars, no reason for someone to be standing alone in the middle of a dark field miles from anywhere. She pressed the gas again and drove past without stopping, forcing her eyes to stay on the road ahead. In the rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse of the figure shrinking into the darkness until it vanished completely. Her heart hammered in her chest. Not my problem, she whispered. Just someone weird, that's all. The fuel needle crept lower. 5 minutes later, she saw another one. This time it was on the left side of the road, a woman, from what Rachel could tell, long hair hanging forward to obscure her face. She stood closer than the first figure, only a few feet from the asphalt, toes nearly touching the crumbling edge. Rachel's headlights illuminated pale skin and a dress that fluttered slightly in the night breeze. The woman's head slowly turned to follow the car as Rachel approached. Rachel's breath caught her in her throat. As she drove past, she risked a glance out the side window. The woman's face was too pale, almost gray, and her eyes looked sunken, like deep-shadowed pits. Her mouth hung open, not quite a scream, not quite a smile. Rachel jerked her gaze back to the road, hands trembling on the wheel. "What the hell is this place?" she gasped. The GPS still insisted she was less than 3 miles from the highway. Her gaslight flickered on, a small glowing amber icon shaped like a fuel pump. "No, no, no," she murmured, tapping the dashboard as if that might reset it. "Come on, not now." She leaned forward, peering into the darkness ahead, as if she could will the highway into existence. The road continued, perfectly straight, and then she saw more figures. One, then another, then several more, spaced out along both sides of the road like silent sentinels. Some stood far back in the fields, barely visible. Others stood so close she could see the details of their clothing. Old-fashioned dresses, work shirts, torn jackets. They all faced the road. They all watched her. Rachel's pulse roared in her ears. She locked her doors with a sharp click even though she was already moving at 40 miles an hour. "This isn't real," she said, voice shaking. I'm just tired. I'm stressed. Melissa just died. My brain is messing with me." But the figures kept coming. One of them stood directly beside a crooked wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Hartley Crossing." The paint was faded and peeling, the letters barely legible. Rachel had never heard of Hartley Crossing. The figure by the sign lifted one arm slowly, pointing down the road as she passed. Its movement was jerky, unnatural, like a puppet tugged by invisible strings. Rachel's foot pressed harder on the accelerator. The gas needle sank to empty. The engine sputtered. "No, no, 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 please," she begged, tears springing to her eyes. "Just a few more miles, please." The car lurched once, twice, then settled into a desperate choking crawl. Rachel coaxed it forward, whispering to it like it was a wounded animal. The headlights flickered. The figures on the roadside seemed closer now, some only a few feet away. Their faces were clearer, eyes too wide, skin stretched tight over bones, mouths open in silent, endless wails. Rachel realized with a sickening jolt that many of them were dressed in funeral clothes, suits, dresses, black veils. Her hands shook violently. "This isn't happening. This isn't happening." The engine gave one final ragged cough and died. The car rolled to a slow, silent stop in the middle of the road. For a moment, there was nothing but the ticking of the cooling engine and Rachel's frantic breathing. The headlights stayed on, illuminating a stretch of empty asphalt ahead and figures lining both sides, frozen in the yellow glow. The GPS screen flickered, then went black. Rachel fumbled for her phone. No signal, of course. She locked the doors again even though they were already locked and curled her hands around the steering wheel like it was a lifeline. The figures began to move. Not quickly, not all at once. One by one, they stepped forward from the fields and onto the shoulder of the road. Their movements were stiff and unnatural, joints bending at wrong angles, heads lolling slightly. Rachel whimpered, "Stay away, please, just stay away." They didn't stop. They approached the car from both sides, their hollow eyes fixed on her. Some pressed their faces close to the windows, fogging the glass with cold breath. Others circled slowly, hands dragging along the metal with soft scraping sounds. One figure stopped directly in front of the hood, blocking the road ahead. In the harsh beam of the headlights, Rachel recognized the face. Melissa. Her sister's hair was arranged the same way it had been in the casket, pinned neatly behind her ears. Her skin was waxy and pale, lips tinged faintly blue, but her eyes were open now, glassy and unfocused. Rachel's scream tore from her throat. Melissa? She sobbed, pressing a shaking hand to the window. Melissa, what is this? What's happening? The figure that wore her sister's face tilted its head, just like the others had, its mouth opened, stretching wider than it should have, as if trying to form words it had forgotten. Rachel's vision blurred with tears. I'm sorry, she choked. I should have visited more. I should have called. I'm so sorry I wasn't there at the end. The thing outside didn't respond. It simply raised one hand and placed it flat against the hood, palm leaving a faint grayish smear. All around the car, the other figures began to mirror the motion, pressing their hands to the windows, the doors, the trunk. The vehicle rocked slightly under the growing weight of their touch. Rachel shrank back in her seat, sobbing openly now. What do you want from me? The GPS screen flickered back to life. Rachel's sobs hitched. She glanced at it. The map was gone. In its place was a single line of text. Rerouting. A new blue line appeared, stretching forward into the darkness, straight through the figure that looked like Melissa. The calm digital voice returned, tinny and distorted. Continue straight for eternity. The figures began to push. The car rolled forward slowly, inch by inch, as if guided by invisible hands. The engine was dead, but the wheels turned anyway, grinding along the asphalt. Rachel screamed, clawing at the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Outside, Melissa's face remained fixed in the headlights as the car crept closer, her expression frozen in that empty, silent wail. The road stretched on, endless and dark, waiting to swallow her whole. I used to think taking out the trash was the easiest chore in the world. 5 minutes, tops. Grab the bag, walk down the narrow alley beside our house, dump it into the big green bin by the back fence, and head back inside before the mosquitoes found me. My mom said I should be grateful it wasn't dishes or laundry. At the time, I agreed. Our alley ran behind a row of identical houses, all peeling paint and flickering porch lights. During the day, it was just ugly. At night, it felt different. Longer, quieter, like it stretched farther than it actually did. The only light came from a busted street lamp at the far end, the bulb dim and yellow, barely pushing back the dark. That's where I saw him the first time. It was late, around 11 p.m. I had my earbuds in and a trash bag slung over my shoulder. As I stepped out the back gate, the alley was empty except for a dark shape near the street lamp. At first I thought it was just a pile of trash or maybe someone's recycling bin tipped over. But then it shifted. I stopped halfway down the alley, one hand still on the gate behind me. The shape was tall and thin, standing directly under the broken lamp. I couldn't make out any features, just a silhouette, like someone had cut the shape of a man out of the night and pasted it there. Hello? I called, my voice sounding way smaller than I wanted it to. The figure didn't move, didn't answer. I waited a few seconds, my heart thumping in my ears, then forced myself to keep walking. I told myself it was probably just one of the neighbors smoking or messing with their phone. When I got closer, the figure seemed to blur the edges, like heat rising off pavement. I tossed the trash into the bin, keeping my eyes on it the whole time. By the time I turned around to head back, the alley was empty. I ran the rest of the way inside and told myself I'd imagined it. The next night, it was there again. Same time, same place, standing at the end of the alley beneath the flickering street lamp. This time I didn't call out. I just stared at it from the back gate, my hand wrapped tight around the trash bag. The air smelled sour and metallic, like rain on hot asphalt. The figure was still, but I could feel it watching me. Not looking, watching. The way you feel someone's eyes on you in a crowded room even before you turn around. I rushed to the bin, dumped the bag, and hurried back without taking my eyes off it. As I shut the gate, the street lamp flickered once, twice, then steadied. The figure was gone. I told my mom about it while she was folding laundry. Probably just one of the neighbors walking their dog, she said without looking up. You know how your imagination gets at night. I know what I saw, I muttered. She gave me that tired smile parents use when they don't believe you but don't want to argue. Just take the trash out earlier if it bothers you. But I couldn't. My stepdad worked late and always tossed his garbage in the kitchen bin right before bed. If I didn't take it out then, I'd be the one waking up to the smell in the morning. So the third night, I went out again. The figure wasn't under the street lamp anymore. It was halfway down the alley. I froze at the gate, a cold prickling crawling up the back of my neck. The distance between the gate and the street lamp wasn't that far, maybe 30 feet. The figure now stood about 15 feet closer than before, directly in the middle of the alley, its shape darker than the shadows around it. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It just existed there, tall, its head tilted slightly to one side like it was studying me. I slammed the gate shut and dragged the trash bag inside. That night, I lay in bed staring at my ceiling, trying to convince myself there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe it was a homeless guy moving around. Maybe it was some kid from the neighborhood messing with me. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. The next evening, my mom reminded me about the trash like nothing was wrong. I'm not going out there, I said, my voice shaking. She frowned. David, it's just an alley. You didn't see it, I snapped, then instantly regretted the way her face fell. After a long, tense silence, she sighed. Fine, I'll come with you. We stepped out together, the porch light casting long shadows behind us. The alley stretched ahead, quiet and empty, except for the figure. It was only 10 feet from the gate now. My mom squinted into the darkness. What am I supposed to be looking at? It's right there, I whispered, grabbing her arm. In the middle of the alley. She peered harder, then shook her head. There's nothing there. The figure stood motionless, its shape somehow darker than the night itself. I could see it clearly, the way its arms hung too long at its sides, the way its shoulders seemed twisted at an odd angle. But my mom just saw empty air. I'm going back inside, she said, pulling her arm away. You're scaring yourself. She left me standing there alone. The figure's head looked further, as if curious. I didn't take the trash out that night, or the next. But no matter how long I waited, eventually the smell in the kitchen would get so bad that I had no choice. On the 6th night, I forced myself to go out again. It was right at the gate, not in the alley, not under the lamp, just a step beyond the wooden fence, its shape towering over me. Up close, it wasn't really a person at all. It had the rough outline of one, but its edges wavered and bled into the darkness like smoke. Where its face should have been, there was only a deeper blackness, like a hole cut into the world. I couldn't breathe. My lungs locked up as I stared into that empty face. Then it leaned forward. Not walking, not stepping, just gliding closer, its form stretching toward me like it was being pulled by invisible strings. I screamed and slammed the gate, stumbling backward across the yard. The trash bag split open when I dropped it, spilling garbage across the grass. But I didn't care. I ran inside, locked the door, and shoved a chair under the knob. That night I dreamed of long alleys and flickering lights, of something watching me from just out of sight. The next morning, the trash was gone from the yard. The grass was clean, like nothing had ever spilled there. I stopped taking the trash out altogether. My mom grounded me, took my phone, even threatened to make me clean the entire house if I didn't stop being dramatic. But she never saw the thing at the gate, never heard the faint scraping sound that started every night around midnight, like something dragging itself along the fence outside my window. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I crept to my window and pulled back the curtain just a little. The alley was dark, the street lamp at the end flickering weakly, and there, right outside the black gate, stood the figure. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It just faced the house, waiting, waiting for me. I don't know why I did what I did next. Maybe I was tired of being scared. Maybe some part of me just wanted to know what would happen. I slipped out of my room, grabbed a fresh trash bag, and tiptoed through the silent house. The clock on the microwave read 12:03 a.m. When I opened the back door, the night air hit me like ice water. The figure was still there, inches beyond the gate, its head angled down as if it had been staring directly at the spot where I now stood. My hand shook as I lifted the latch and pushed the gate open. The alley was silent. Even the usual hum of distant traffic seemed to fade away. I stepped out, clutching the trash bag to my chest. The figure loomed just ahead, tall and shapeless, its darkness swallowing the weak glow from the street lamp. "Why are you here?" I whispered. For the first time, it moved in a way that felt deliberate. Its arms, too long, bending at too many places, lifted slowly and pointed down the alley, toward the street lamp. I swallowed hard and forced my legs to move, one step, then another. With every step I took, it seemed to drift backward, keeping the same distance between us. It was leading me. I realized, guiding me toward the end of the alley where the lamp flickered and buzzed. When I reached the bin and dropped the trash inside, the figure stopped retreating. It hovered directly beneath the street lamp now, its edges shimmering in the weak yellow light. The bulb flickered once, twice, then burned steadily for the first time since we'd moved in. Under that steady light, I saw what the figure really was. It wasn't solid. It was made of shadows, hundreds of them, writhing together in the shape of a man, faces pressed against the inside of it, their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes wide and empty, their hands pushed against the surface of the darkness, stretching it in thin places before being pulled back inside. I stumbled backward, bile rising in my throat. The figure, they, turned toward me as one, and then I understood. It had never been getting closer. It had been waiting for me to come closer to it. The shadows surged forward, faster than I could react. Cold wrapped around my arms, my chest, my throat. I tried to scream, but the darkness poured into my mouth, filling my lungs, dragging me down into a place where there was no light and no sound, only the pressure of other bodies pressed against mine. I woke up lying in my bed, gasping for air. Morning light streamed through my window, birds chirped outside. For a second, I thought it had all been a nightmare. Then my mom knocked on my door. "David, you forgot to take the trash out again last night," she called. "Please do it before school." I swung my legs out of bed, my body trembling. In the mirror above my dresser, my reflection stared back at me. But the shadows in my eyes seemed deeper than they should have been, shifting slightly when I didn't move. That night, when I stepped into the alley with the trash bag in my hand, the streetlight at the end glowed bright and steady. And at the far end of the alley, just at the edge of the light, a new figure stood watching me, solid, human-shaped, and trembling. It looked exactly like me. I've delivered pizzas to some weird places. College dorms that smelled like feet and regret. Mansions with gates taller than my apartment building. Even a church once during a midnight youth retreat. But nothing like that house on County Road E. It was a little past 11:30 p.m. when the order came in. Large pepperoni, extra cheese, garlic knots, 2-liter cola. Paid in cash. The address was scribbled in shaky handwriting on the receipt, like whoever called it in had trouble holding the phone steady. "Outskirts," my manager muttered, handing me the insulated bag. "You'll want to hurry. That area gets dark." I laughed it off, grabbed my keys, and headed out. I needed the tip. The drive took longer than expected, streetlights thinned out, then vanished completely, leaving only my headlights carving a tunnel through the black. The road narrowed to a cracked strip of asphalt, weeds clawing in from both sides. My GPS lost signal 10 minutes in, leaving me with just the handwritten directions. Past the old grain silo, second dirt road on the left. I almost missed the turn. The dirt road looked more like a deer trail, and my tires crunched over gravel and broken glass as I followed it deeper into the woods. Trees arched overhead, their branches knitting it together, swallowing the sky. Then I saw the house. It crouched at the end of a long, sagging driveway, its windows dark, roof partially collapsed on one side. The front porch leaned like it was trying to escape. No lights, no cars, no sign of life. I sat there with the engine idling, staring at it, wondering if I'd been pranked. The place looked condemned, but the order had been real. The call had come from a landline, and I was already here. I grabbed the pizzas and stepped out. The night air smelled like damp wood and something sour, like rot. My footsteps echoed too loudly as I climbed the porch steps, each one groaning in protest. I knocked. The sound echoed inside the house, hollow and deep, as if the place were bigger on the inside than it looked. For a moment nothing happened, just the whisper of wind through broken boards. Then, footsteps. Slow, dragging, coming toward the door. My stomach tightened. "Pizza delivery," I called, forcing cheer into my voice. The footsteps stopped right on the other side. I could hear breathing now, wet, labored, like someone with a bad cold pressed right against the wood. The doorknob turned with a soft click. The door opened only a few inches. A single eye stared at me through the gap. It was pale and watery, sunk deep in a face I couldn't fully see. The skin around it looked gray, stretched tight over bone. Yeah? I stammered. "Large pepperoni?" The door creaked open a little more. A man stood there, hunched and thin, wearing what might once have been a robe. His hair hung in greasy clumps around his face. The smell that poured out from the house made my eyes water. Mold, decay, and something metallic. "How much?" he croaked. I told him the total. His hand trembled as he passed me a wad of bills through the crack. His fingers were ice cold when they brushed mine. "Keep the change," he whispered. The tip was generous. Too generous. I started to thank him, but he didn't close the door. He just stood there, staring at me with that one pale eye. Something moved behind him in the darkness of the house, a shape low to the ground slipping past the hallway behind his back. I frowned. You got someone else in there? I can bring in the drinks if..." His head snapped toward me so fast his neck popped. "No," he said sharply, then softer, almost pleading. "No one else. You should go." That should have been the end of it. I had my money, the job was done, but curiosity has always been my worst trait. "I just need you to sign the receipt," I said, holding up my clipboard. "Company policy." He hesitated. For a long moment he just stared at the clipboard, then at me, as if weighing something terrible. Finally, he opened the door wider and stepped back. "Quickly," he said. The inside of the house was worse than the outside. The air was thick and humid, walls stained with dark streaks that ran from ceiling to floor. The floorboards felt softer under my shoes, like they might give way. I kept my eyes on the old man as he scribbled something that might have been his name, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Something shifted in the hallway behind him again. I glanced past his shoulder. The hallway was long and narrow, swallowed by darkness, but halfway down, one of the doors was slightly open, and something pale peeked out from behind it. A hand. Too long, too thin, the fingers bent at wrong angles, clutching the edge of the doorframe. My breath caught. The old man noticed where I was looking. His entire body tensed. "You should leave," he whispered urgently, shoving the clipboard back into my hands. The hand in the hallway twitched. Slowly, another one appeared beneath it, gripping the door frame from below. Something inside the room shifted, as if crouching, preparing to crawl out. "What is that?" I asked before I could stop myself. The old man's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked less like something out of a nightmare and more like a terrified grandfather. "I tried to keep it fed," he said hoarsely. "That's why I called. It gets angry when it's hungry." A low, wet giggle echoed from the hallway. The thing stepped into view. It was roughly the size of a child, but its limbs were stretched and twisted, skin hanging loosely from its bones. Its head lolled to one side, jaw hanging open in a grin that was too wide, filled with small, sharp teeth. Its eyes were black pits, reflecting the faint light from the doorway. It stared at the pizza boxes in my hands, then at me. The old man lunged for the door. "Run!" I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted, nearly dropping the pizzas as I sprinted across the porch and down the steps. Behind me I heard the door slam, and then a crash as something inside the house slammed into it from the other side. I dove into my car and fumbled with the keys. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped them onto the floor mat. The front door of the house burst open. The old man stumbled out, screaming, blood already soaking through his robe. Something clung to his back. Its long limbs wrapped around his torso like a spider. Its head craned over his shoulder, eyes locked on me. "Go!" he shrieked. I found the keys, jammed them into the ignition, and the engine roared to life. Gravel sprayed as I slammed on the gas. In the rearview mirror I saw the old man collapse. The creature slid off him, landing lightly on all fours. It watched my car for a moment, head tilted. Then it started to chase. It moved impossibly fast, its limbs bending and snapping back like springs. It kept pace with my car down the dirt road, gaining whenever I hit a bump or had to swerve around a fallen branch. I was screaming, loud, panic sounds I didn't recognize as my own. The road felt endless, the darkness swallowing everything but the creature in my mirrors, its groan growing wider as it closed the distance. Just as the dirt road met the main asphalt, my tires found traction. I floored it. The creature skidded to a stop at the edge of the trees, crouching there, its chest heaving. It didn't follow me onto the paved road. It just watched, its black eyes reflecting my taillights as I sped away. I didn't stop driving until I reached town. The next morning I told my manager everything. He laughed at first, thinking I was joking. But when I showed him the blood smeared across the side of my car, long, thin streaks like someone had dragged their fingers across the metal, his smile faded. We called the police. They went out to the address that afternoon. They found the house just like I described. They found the old man's body on the porch, but they didn't find any sign of the creature. They said the blood on my car was probably from the old man grabbing onto it as I drove away. They said shock can make people see things that aren't there. A week later, I quit the job. I thought I'd be able to forget about it, chalk it up to some horrible, one-time nightmare. Then last night, as I was laying in bed, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something in my chest tightened, and I opened the message. It was just an address, no words, just another place on the outskirts of town. A second message followed. Hungry again. We started the hike at 9:12 in the morning. I remember because Liam made a big show of checking his watch and saying, "If we're not back by 5, assume we've been eaten by bears and tell my mom I died doing something cool." We laughed. That was the last time anything felt normal. There were 5 of us. Me, Liam, Tara, Mason, and Jules. The trailhead was tucked at the end of a narrow dirt road, surrounded by pine trees so tall they looked like they were holding the sky up. It was one of those lesser-known mountain trails Liam had found on some hiking forum. Light traffic, amazing views, moderate difficulty. Sounded perfect for a Saturday. At first, it was perfect. The air was cold enough to sting your lungs in a good way, and everything smelled like damp earth and pine sap. We joked, took pictures, and argued about who'd brought the worst snacks. The trail was narrow, but clearly marked. Little red blazes pointed on tree trunks every couple dozen yards. About an hour in, the trail began to twist, more than we expected. It would double back on itself, then veer sharply uphill, then flatten out again. We didn't think much of it. Mountains are like that. You go up, you go down. You lose your sense of direction. Still, I started noticing something strange. The red blazes were getting further apart. At one point, we walked nearly 10 minutes without seeing one. We stopped, turning in slow circles, scanning the trees. "You sure this is the right path?" Tara asked, brushing strands of hair from her face. She had that half-laughing tone she used when she was worried but didn't want to admit it. Liam checked his phone, though there was no signal. "Trail's supposed to be a loop. We just keep following it. We'll circle back to the parking lot." So we kept walking. Another hour passed. The sun had climbed higher, but the trees were so dense that the forest floor stayed dim and green. The trail didn't look like it was looping. If anything, it felt like it was leading us deeper into the mountains. We saw the next red blaze carved into a tree trunk at eye level, but it looked different. The paint was faded, flaking off in strips. It looked old, way older than the fresh, bright markings we'd seen at the start. "Maybe they don't maintain this part as much," Jules said, but her voice was tight. We walked on. Then we found the first sign that we weren't alone. It was a footprint in the mud beside the trail, deep and fresh. The sole had a distinct zigzag pattern, and the edges were still moist, like it had been made minutes ago. We all crowded around it. "Another hiker?" Mason said too quickly. "See? We're fine." But the footprint was pointed the same direction we were going. We kept moving, now in a tight cluster instead of our earlier loose formation. Every few minutes someone would glance over their shoulder. The forest had grown quieter. No birds, no wind through the branches, just the soft crunch of our boots and the occasional snap of a twig. The trail began to slope downward into a narrow valley. The trees closed in, their branches knitting overhead until the sky was just thin strips of gray between needles. The air felt colder here, and the ground was damp, sucking at our shoes. That's when I heard the first set of footsteps that weren't ours. It was faint, almost lost under the sound of our own walking. But it was there, a second rhythm, slightly out of sync with ours. I stopped abruptly, and the others nearly walked into me. "What?" Tara whispered. "Did you hear that?" We all stood there holding our breath. For a few seconds there was nothing. Then somewhere behind us, a twig snapped. Liam forced a laugh. "Probably a deer." "Deer don't follow people," Jules said. We hurried on after that. The trail twisted again, curving around a steep rock face. The red blazes were almost non-existent now. Sometimes we'd go 20 minutes without seeing one, and when we did, it would be so faded we had to squint to make it out. "Guys," Mason said finally, stopping. "I don't think this is a loop. I think we missed the turnoff." Silence fell over us. The idea hung there heavy and obvious. We should have turned back right then. We should have retraced our steps while it was still early enough to matter. Instead, Liam said, "Let's just go a bit further. If we hit a clearing or another trail, we'll get our bearings." So we went a bit further. The valley narrowed until the trail became a thin strip of packed dirt between two steep slopes. Rocks jutted out of the ground like broken teeth. My legs were starting to ache, and my water bottle was already half empty. That's when we saw the second footprint. This one was right in the middle of the trail. Same zigzagging sole pattern, fresh, and beside it another one, slightly smaller, but just as clear. "They weren't there before," Tara said, her voice trembling. "We would have stepped on them." We all knew she was right. Someone was behind us, close enough to be making new tracks on a trail we'd just walked. "Hey!" Liam shouted suddenly, turning around. Hello? We're just trying to find the main trail. His voice echoed off the rock walls and died in the trees. No answer came back. We walked faster after that. Talking stopped. Every few minutes, one of us would look back, half expecting to see someone standing in the middle of the trail. But there was nothing, just the empty path stretching into shadow. The feeling of being watched grew so strong it was almost physical, like a hand pressing between my shoulder blades. I started imagining things in the corner of my eye, shapes slipping between trees, movement just beyond where I was looking. Around 3 in the afternoon, we reached a fork in the trail. One path climbed steeply uphill, the other descended deeper into the valley. There's no sign, Mason said, spinning slowly. Nothing. Which way? No one answered. The red blazes were gone completely now. It felt like the trail had just stopped being official. We should go back, Jules said, finally saying what we were all thinking. We follow our footprints back to the car. So we turned around. I expected relief, but instead I felt dread. The path behind us looked different somehow. Darker, narrower, like the forest had shifted while we weren't looking. We hadn't walked more than 5 minutes back the way we'd come when we saw them. Our footprints were there in the mud, just as we'd left them, but weaving in and out between them were another set of prints, the same zigzag soles, crisscrossing ours, sometimes stepping directly on top of them. Whoever was following us had been walking right in our footsteps. Tara made a small choking sound. They've been behind us this whole time. No one said it out loud, but we were all thinking the same thing. We never heard them that close. We started jogging. Branches whipped at our arms as we hurried up the trail. The valley wall seemed to lean inward, squeezing us. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, and beneath it, faint but unmistakable, were the sounds of footsteps that weren't ours, keeping pace. Stop! Liam suddenly hissed. We froze. Up ahead, where the trail curved around a cluster of boulders, something moved. Just a flicker of motion, dark against darker shadow. Hello? Mason called, his voice shaking. The figure stepped out onto the trail. At first I thought it was just another hiker, someone in dark clothing, standing perfectly still. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized something was off. They were too tall. Their limbs were too long, hanging at strange angles, and their head was tilted so far to the side it looked like their neck should have snapped. It stood there, blocking the trail, completely silent. Hey! Liam tried again, his voice barely above a whisper. We're lost. Can you help us get back to the main trail? The figure didn't answer. It didn't move. It just watched us. Then, behind us, we heard another set of footsteps. We spun around. Another figure stood there, identical to the first. Same height, same twisted posture, same unnatural stillness. There were only one set of prints, Jules whispered, her voice breaking. There was only one. The first figure took a step toward us. The movement was wrong, jerky, like a puppet being yanked by invisible strings. We ran. We didn't think about direction or trails anymore. We just bolted off the path and into the trees, crashing through underbrush and sliding down loose dirt. Branches tore at our clothes and scratched our faces, but we didn't stop. Behind us, something moved through the forest with terrifying ease. No crashing, no stumbling, just quick, smooth footsteps that always seemed just a few yards behind. I don't know how long we ran. Minutes blurred together. My lungs burned and my legs felt like they were made of wet sand. At some point, we lost Liam. One moment, he was beside me, gasping, and the next, he was gone. Liam! Tara screamed, but the only answer was the echo of her voice and the distant rhythmic sound of something moving through the trees. We kept running. Eventually the forest began to thin. The ground leveled out, and through the trees I saw a strip of gray road pavement. We burst out of the tree line and onto the narrow road ahead, collapsing onto the gravel shoulder. There was no sign of the figures, no footprints in the dirt behind us, no broken branches, just the quiet forest, swaying gently in the winds as if nothing had happened. A passing truck found us an hour later. The driver helped us into the cab and drove us back to the trailhead parking lot. Liam's car was still there. Search teams went out that evening. They combed the trails, the valley, the surrounding woods. They found our backpacks dropped in the underbrush. They found the fork in the trail. They never found Liam. A few weeks later, after we'd all given our statements, a ranger showed me something on his phone. It was an old archived map of the mountain trails. The loop trail we'd meant to take was clearly marked, but branching off from it, leading down into the valley where we'd gotten lost, was another path, one that hadn't been maintained or officially recognized for over 30 years. Next to it, in faded type, was a handwritten note scanned from the original ranger logs. Trail closed after multiple reports of hikers being followed. One disappearance confirmed. Cause unknown. I don't hike anymore, but sometimes, when I'm trying to fall asleep, I remember the way those footprints had overlapped ours, step for step, perfectly matching our pace. And I wonder how long they'd been walking behind us before we ever thought to look back. I almost didn't go. It was a Thursday night, and I had a paper due at midnight. But Tyler from my psych class kept insisting. "Bro, it's not like a regular frat party," he said, grinning in that way that made it seem like he knew something I didn't. "You'll regret missing this one." That should have been my first clue. By the time I showed up, the house was already vibrating with bass and laughter. Red plastic cups littered the lawn, and someone had dragged a couch out onto the porch. Everything looked normal. Too normal, maybe. Tyler found me at the door and clapped me on the shoulder like we were old friends. "You made it," he said. "Come on, I'll show you around." Inside, the air smelled like beer and cheap cologne. People were dancing in the living room, shouting over the music. It felt like every other party I'd been to since freshman year. I started to relax. We moved through the crowd, past the kitchen, and toward a hallway in the back. The music grew quieter with every step. "Basement's where the real party is," Tyler said. I hesitated at the top of the stairs. The light down there was dim, yellow, like a bulb that was about to burn out. "I thought the party was up here," I said. He just smiled. "Trust me." The stairs creaked under our weight as we descended. The music from upstairs faded into a dull thump overhead. At the bottom, Tyler pushed open a door I hadn't noticed. The room beyond wasn't a basement like I expected. There were no ping-pong tables, no kegs, no piles of discarded jackets. Instead, the space had been cleared out completely. The concrete floor was bare except for a circle drawn in something dark. Paint, I told myself. It had to be paint. There were maybe a dozen people down there. They were standing in a ring around the circle wearing long, dark robes with hoods pulled low over their faces. Some had masks, plain white ones, expressionless like mannequins. They were completely silent. I stopped in the doorway. "What the hell is this?" I asked, trying to laugh, but it came out thin and shaky. Tyler didn't answer. I turned to look at him, and that's when I noticed he pulled a mask from somewhere and was tying it behind his head. It was the same blank white as the others. "Tyler?" I said, my stomach tightening. He stepped past me and into the room, taking his place in the circle, as if he'd done it 100 times before. The people in robes shifted slightly, making space for him without a word. Someone behind me shut the door. The click of the latch echoed like a gunshot. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. One of the robed figures stood between me and the stairs now, taller than the rest, their mask painted with thin black lines that ran down like tears. "This is just a joke, right?" I said, forcing a laugh. "Like some kind of initiation prank?" No one answered. The tall one stepped forward, their robe whispering against the concrete. They gestured toward the center of the circle. "Wait, hold on," I said, backing up until my shoulders hit the wall. "Tyler, seriously, what is this?" Tyler didn't move. He didn't even look at me. The others began to hum, low at first, a single note that vibrated in my chest. It grew louder, swelling until the entire room seemed to pulse with it. The sound wasn't musical, it was droning, mechanical, like a broken machine trying to start. I tried the doorknob behind me. It wouldn't budge. "Stop it," I said louder now. "This isn't funny." The tall figure reached out and grabbed my arm. Their grip was cold and surprisingly strong. I struggled, but two more robed people stepped in, taking my other arm. They pulled me forward toward the center of the circle. My shoes scraped against the concrete. I shouted, twisted, tried to wrench free, but their hands tightened like clamps. They forced me to my knees inside the dark circle. Up close, I could see the markings weren't paint. They were too glossy, too uneven. I didn't want to think about what they might actually be. The humming stopped all at once. The sudden silence made my ears ring. The tall figure stepped into the circle in front of me. Slowly, deliberately, they removed their mask. It was Tyler. Or it had been Tyler. His eyes looked different. Too wide, too focused, like he was staring through me instead of at me. "You said you wanted to feel like you belong," he said quietly. "Remember?" I did remember. A week earlier after class I'd complained about how hard it was to make real friends here, how everyone already seemed to have their group. He'd nodded, sympathetic, and told me he knew exactly what I meant. This isn't what I meant," I whispered. He tilted his head, studying me like a specimen. "It's okay," he said. "It only hurts for a little while." Something behind him moved. One of the others stepped forward holding a small curved blade that caught the dim light. My chest tightened, and the room seemed to shrink around me. "Please," I said, my voice cracking. I won't tell anyone, I swear." Tyler's expression didn't change. "That's why we chose you," he said. "You're the kind of person who would keep a promise." They forced my hand out, palm up over the center of the circle. The blade hovered just above my skin. Upstairs, someone cheered at something in the music, the muffled sound drifting down through the floorboards like it came from another world. I realized then that nobody up there knew what was happening below their feet. Or maybe they did. And that was worse. The blade touched my skin, cold and sharp, and the circle around me began to glow faintly, as if the darkness itself was waking up. That's when I started screaming. People in Devil's Horn didn't talk about the missing kids unless they had to. It was one of those things that lived in the background, like the constant wind that whistled through the horn-shaped cliffs on the edge of town. You stopped noticing it most days, but sometimes it screamed loud enough to remind you it was there. My mom always said the wind sounded like laughter if you listened too long. I was 16 when she started sending me next door to check on Mr. Halverson. "He's old, Eli," she said, folding laundry in the living room, "and he doesn't have anyone. It's the decent thing to do." I didn't argue, I just didn't like it. Mr. Halverson's house leaned toward ours, like it was trying to eavesdrop. The paint had peeled to the point where the wood underneath looked gray and sickly. His porch sagged in the middle, and every time I stepped on it, the boards groaned like something waking up. I'd always thought there was something wrong with him, not in an obvious way. He wasn't mean or cruel. He just watched people too closely. His pale eyes tracked you the way a cat watched a bug, patient and curious. The first day I knocked on his door, he opened it almost immediately, as if he'd been standing there waiting. "Ah," he said, smiling with thin lips. "Mrs. Carver's boy. Eli, isn't it?" I nodded. "My mom said to see if you needed help with anything." He studied me for a minute, then stepped aside. "Come in. It's been a long time since I've had company." The smell hit me first, damp and sweet, like mold mixed with old candy. His house was cluttered but tidy in a strange way. Everything had a place, even if that place was on top of something else. And then there were the masks. They hung on the walls in neat rows, dozens of them, porcelain faces painted in bright frozen smiles. Some were clowns, others jesters with sharp black triangles around their eyes and bells sculpted into their caps. "You collect those?" I asked, trying not to stare. He followed my gaze and chuckled softly. "A hobby from younger days. I used to travel with the small carnival when I was a boy. Costumes, performances, that sort of thing." Devil's Horn used to get traveling carnivals back when my mom was a kid. Not anymore. I started visiting him every day after school. Sometimes I'd bring groceries, sometimes I'd mow his lawn, but mostly I just sat in his living room while he talked. He told long, rambling stories about places he'd been, people he'd met. I wasn't sure how much of it was true, but he seemed happier with someone listening. At night, though, I'd lie in bed and think about the masks staring down from his walls, and about the stories we'd all grown up with. The Devil's Jester. The myth said he'd once been a performer who came through town decades ago. Kids loved him at first, until a few of them vanished after following him into the woods outside Devil's Horn. The townsfolk chased him off, but the disappearances didn't stop. Over the years, children kept going missing, always without a trace. Police called them runaways or accidents. Everyone else said the jester had come back. The year I turned 16, another kid disappeared. Lily Tran, 8 years old, vanished from her bedroom in the middle of the night. Her window had been open. Muddy footprints led from the flower bed to the street, and then just stopped. The whole town went quiet for weeks after that. When I mentioned it to Mr. Halverson, he sighed deeply and shook his head. "Such a shame. Children should never have to know fear." I studied him carefully. "Do you think the Devil's Jester is real?" He smiled, eyes glittering. "Every town needs its monsters, Eli. Otherwise, people might start looking for real ones." I didn't know what that meant, but it stuck with me. I arrived at his house to find him already sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea poured. "You're getting punctual," I joked, dropping my backpack by the door. He smiled. "I enjoy routine. It gives life. Structure." We talked for maybe 20 minutes before I heard the sirens. At first they were distant, just faint wails carried by the wind, but they grew louder quickly. Too many of them. I frowned and looked toward the front window. "That's weird," I said. "Sounds like they're coming down our street." Mr. Halverson didn't respond. The sirens cut off abruptly, replaced by the heavy slam of car doors. Through the thin curtains, flashing red and blue lights painted the living room in violent colors. My stomach tightened. What's going on? There was a sharp knock at the door, then another, harder. "Police! Open up!" I looked at Mr. Halverson. He was perfectly still, hands folded in his lap. His expression wasn't surprised or scared. It was resigned. He stood slowly and shuffled to the door, unlocking it with trembling fingers. When he opened it, 3 officers stood on the porch, hands resting near their holsters. "Harold Halverson?" one of them asked. He nodded. "We have a warrant to search your property. Step aside, sir." I felt a cold rush through my chest. "What? Why?" The officer glanced at me. "Son, you need to step outside." I didn't move. "What's happening?" Mr. Halverson turned his head toward me. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked old, really old, like he might crumble into dust if something touched him. "I suppose," he said quietly, "it was only a matter of time." The officers guided him out onto the porch, gently but firmly. More police were already moving around the yard, some heading toward the back of the house. One of them noticed me lingering in the hallway. "You live next door, kid? Go home. This isn't something you need to see." But I stayed. I don't know why. Maybe because some part of me had always been waiting for something like this. They started searching the house, opening closets, checking under beds. One officer paused in front of the wall of masks, frowning. "What the hell?" Another officer in the kitchen called out, "Sarge, you need to see this." They found the basement door. I'd never seen it before. It was hidden behind a tall cabinet in the pantry, a narrow wooden door with a heavy lock. The cabinet had been shoved aside, revealing it. "Key?" the sergeant asked, looking at Mr. Halverson, who stood on the porch between two officers. Mr. Halverson said nothing. They broke the lock. The smell hit us first when the door swung open, rotting sweetness and something metallic underneath. Even from the hallway, it made my eyes water. One officer shone a flashlight down the narrow staircase. Jeez. They started down, weapons drawn. I crept closer despite myself, stopping at the top step. The beam of light swept across the basement floor and landed on a pile of small shoes. Different sizes, different colors, dozens of them. My stomach lurched. There were toys scattered everywhere. Dolls, action figures, broken bicycles. Against one wall stood a long work bench covered in tools and scraps of fabric in bright reds and yellows. Jester colors. And hanging from a hook was a costume. A full jester outfit, patched and worn, with tiny brass bells sewn along the edges. Beside it hung a cracked porcelain mask with a painted smile and black diamond shapes around the eyes. "The Devil's Jester," one of the officers whispered. In the far corner of the basement, a small mattress lay on the concrete floor. Chains were bolted to the wall above it. I felt like I was going to throw up. They brought Mr. Halverson down the stairs in handcuffs. He didn't resist. He just looked around the basement like a man revisiting an old home. "You sick bastard," one officer muttered. Mr. Halverson's eyes flickered to me, standing at the top of the stairs. His expression softened. "I never meant for you to see this, Eli." My voice came out hoarse. "All those kids? It was you?" He tilted his head slightly. "The town needed a monster. They always talked about the Jester. They were afraid of him. I simply gave them what they expected." "You kidnapped them," I said, my hand shaking. "You hurt them." He sighed. "I gave them a place where they were noticed, where they weren't ignored or left alone in their rooms while their parents drank or fought. They laughed. You know, at first, they always laughed." The room spun. All those years of whispers, of warnings about a myth, and the monster had been living 10 feet from my bedroom window. "You were my friend," I said weakly. Mr. Halverson's smile was small and sad. "Yes, and that's why you were never in danger." They led him back upstairs, reading him his rights while neighbors gathered at the edges of their lawns, whispering and staring. Word spread through Devil's Horn in minutes. By nightfall, news vans had arrived. Reporters stood in front of his sagging house, speaking into cameras about the man who had terrorized the town for decades. The Devil's Jester wasn't a ghost or a demon or a cursed performer. He was just an old man who liked to wear a mask. In the weeks that followed, more evidence surfaced. Some of the missing kids had been kept in that basement for days before he'd panicked and done worse things to keep them quiet. Others had escaped briefly only to be dragged back. The details were everywhere, on TV, in the newspaper, whispered in the grocery store aisles. Devil's Horn finally had its answer, but it didn't make anyone feel better. I stopped sleeping well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the row of tiny shoes and the cracked porcelain mask smiling in the dark. Sometimes, when the wind howled through the cliffs at night, it still sounded like laughter. And even though I knew the truth, that there had never been any supernatural jester stalking the streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching from the shadows. Because the scariest part wasn't that the Devil's Jester had been real. It was that he'd been human all along, and I'd sat across from him every day, drinking tea and listening to stories, while he smiled at me with those pale, patient eyes.